I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. Welcome back to the show, Hilliard.
Nice to be on, Jim.
Just saw a report that delinquency rates for loans in both Alberta and Saskatchewan up dramatically. Are you seeing any of that in your industry?
You know, it's interesting that, I noticed that same report, and it was put out by a U.S. company, if you noticed, and the Canadian lenders have been very, very slow to highlight any of that, but you can see it all around you if you live in Alberta and Saskatchewan, the difficulties that are starting to appear. But only the lenders know for sure. And one of the things that's happening in Alberta is that the lenders are still being very helpful and cooperative. There's a billboard out by one of the major Alberta-based lenders saying, "We've got your back," and that, I think they're trying to give the impression that if you can't make your payments, we'll help you. One of the things they do is they tack that payment onto the end of the loan, but at some point that doesn't work anymore, and I don't know how many months that they would be willing to do that, but once they lose their patience, then they get much tougher, and I suspect we're getting close to that point. One of the interesting things from the lenders that are publicly traded that have to report their results is they have almost zero loan loss reserves compared to U.S. banks and U.S. lenders. The Canadian lenders have, because they've had so few loan losses up until now, they don't have any reserves for loan losses because the rules say that you're supposed to base your reserves based on your recent experience in loan losses. So we're going from a period when there's been very few loan losses to a big jump in loan losses, and then of course the reserves will have to go up exponentially from this point forward, and that'll have a big impact on the attitude. Lenders won't be, I don't think they'll be as willing to be so cooperative to help people through this tough times. At some point they'll start foreclosing, and that's going to be very interesting. But no, for sure we do see signs of it here.
I believe Danielle Park, one of our regular correspondents, told me U.S. banks typically have 2 to 4% of their assets reserved to cover bad loans. In Canada, it was 0.2% or less.
Yeah, it's amazing. It really is. And to defend the Canadian lenders, they haven't really had the losses. So that's why it is the way it is. Now, they have recently recognized some possibility of losses in the oil and gas sector directly, but they're still only reserving 40 basis points, so that would be about double the 20 basis points that you were talking about. But it's much, much, much lower. Like it's a factor of like tenfold lower than what the U.S. banks have recognized. Now, it's possible that the U.S. borrowers are in much worse shape, and the Canadian borrowers are all going to make it through this next couple of years without any problems, but it seems to me to be extremely unlikely. We won't know until people start defaulting. But one of the things in the oil and gas sector is it's not just the oil and gas sector. It's going to affect all the trucking companies, the real estate companies, all of the people that were lending or were working with the oil and gas sector, and people that work for the oil and gas sector will find that things like car loans people start missing their payments. The new thing now, I learned, I was talking to somebody about that, the new thing now is the car loan providers, they have a device implanted in the car that if somebody doesn't make their payment, they just disable the car. And then they also have GPS so they can locate it. So they first disable it, which means the person who's defaulted probably just walks away from the car. and then they can easily go and repossess it. And so that'll work if it's only a few cars, but if it's a bunch of cars, then of course they're not going to be able to sell those cars, on the resale market. So that's, all of that is happening now. One of the companies that's coming out tomorrow, it would be quite interesting, is called Boardwalk Real Estate Investment Trust, and they have a lot of rental properties in Alberta. And so far they're still doing very well. Their last report 3 months ago, they indicated that rents were down like 3 or 4% in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but I suspect since then it's gotten quite a bit worse. So we're watching that one very closely to see if there's any signs of people getting into trouble. If people start defaulting on their homes, then they may actually go into rental accommodation, and that may be a positive for the rental markets. But initially, I think everything will go down. The rent prices will go down as well as the house prices.
Doesn't Alberta have different rules when it comes to mortgages and repossession and so on?
There is one special rule, legislation that was put in the 1930s during the Depression. So what happened in the Depression was a bunch of Eastern lenders foreclosed on a bunch of properties, and the government of the day put in a rule that said that the lenders couldn't foreclose on somebody's house that they lived in. So and then they can foreclose, but they can't chase them for the deficit. So say somebody owed $300,000 on a house which eventually gets sold for $200,000. There's a $100,000 deficit. The lender can't pursue the homeowner for that. So that applies in Alberta, and I think in some cases might be in Saskatchewan, but nowhere else in Canada. But the problem with that is it only applies to conventional mortgages, and I think that the lenders have put clauses in the more recent loans to kind of get around that. But in any case, if it's a CMHC financed loan, which a lot of the loans are, that provision doesn't apply. So it exists, but I suspect in this next credit cycle that we're going to go through, not very many people will be able to take advantage of it. And a lot of people, there's still, at the peak in the U.S., 31% of the people were underwater on their mortgages, and there's still 13% of the people underwater on their mortgages in the United States even today, basically 10 years later. And they're still paying their mortgage payments even though they're underwater. So there's a real tendency for people to stay in their homes and not default, even when maybe strategic defaulting might be the right thing to do, especially if in Alberta you could walk away from being pursued for the deficit.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth, and we'll be talking about the risks Donald Trump would pose to Canada if he becomes president.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the 4th largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. Hilliard, you've just done some extensive research on the kind of risks Canada would face if Donald Trump wins the presidency. What kind of risks?
Well, there's quite a few areas where I found where the policies, and the thing is, I should say, before we get into specifics, I should say people, all the way along have underestimated Donald Trump in the sense that he says outlandish things, and then people say, well, he'll moderate it. He'll moderate what he says when he gets into the campaign, and then he actually gets more outlandish, and then they say, well, yes, but he'll moderate what he says when he gets the nomination. So then he gets the nomination, and then he gets even more outlandish. So up until now, I think people, myself included, were kind of discounting the possibility that some of these policies might get actually implemented. However, and he is behind in the polls, so people are saying, well, maybe he won't win. But just for fun, let's have a look at what would happen if he does win. So there's 3 areas. There's at least 3 areas I identified. And one is defense, one is free trade, and one is the energy sector. So in the defense sector, Donald is quite often will make statements about the U.S. is defending everybody and nobody's carrying their weight. So I looked it up, and under NATO, we're all supposed to be paying 2% of our GDP as cost of defense. And Canada was paying 2% as recently as 1988, but we're now down to 1%. So the U.S. government pays 3.9% of their GDP into defense. So his argument actually is correct in the sense that the U.S. is spending so much money on the military that the rest of us have gotten into the habit of not spending very much at all. Now, it is a huge economic stimulus for the United States, all the money they spend on their military, and it's one of the ways that they allocate money to different sectors to get a little economic boost going in certain areas. But if Canada went up to the 2% minimum that NATO suggests, we would have to spend about $18 billion more, and that would basically put a huge hole in our already quite large budget deficit. So the second thing is free trade, and he says that all of the free trade agreements were rigged against the United States, and the deals that were done were bad deals, and he, being such a master negotiator, is going to rip up the agreements and get a good deal. So the problem for Canada with that is that we have been benefiting from the Auto Pact, which goes back to the 1960s, and then the Free Trade Agreement in the 1980s, and then more recently NAFTA, which includes Mexico. And we've been producing way more cars and way more auto parts than we consume here in Canada, and we've been selling them to the United States. So if he did rip up the NAFTA Free Trade Agreement, it would be a big negative, especially for Ontario, but it would affect all of us. But the biggest one I found out of the three is the energy policy. So what Donald says here, I've got the quote, is, "Under my presidency, we will accomplish complete American energy independence." End quote. So the problem with that is Canada sells a huge amount of oil and oil-related products to the United States. It's our biggest export by far, and it would be devastating, especially for Alberta and to some extent Saskatchewan and Newfoundland, if he actually went ahead and did what he said he's going to do. Now, he doesn't talk about Canada specifically when he talks about getting independence. He's talking more about the Arabs and the Muslims and the Middle East and that sort of thing. He generally doesn't mention Canada, but it is a big deal. It's $74 billion in 2015. It's down about 10% so far this year, mostly because of the price of oil. But it's one of our most important economic factors is exporting to the United States. And overall exports this year are down about 8% compared to last year. So even without the new policies that Donald Trump would bring in, we're already suffering some weakness and our trade deficit in Canada has gone to record levels. Now there actually are two positives. One is, and I think people have heard about this, is that he says he will not build a wall between the United States and Canada, as he's claimed that he will build a wall with Mexico, but he's ruling out a wall with Canada. He said it would be too difficult, too big a border. And he also has said that he would consider a new application for the Keystone Pipeline, which Obama has refused to sign. So that's a positive if the Keystone Pipeline were approved by a Trump president. But there's another one that I read in the Globe and Mail. The columnist John Ibbotson said the economic boost from all those Americans moving north to escape a Donald Trump presidency would be a huge positive for Canada. So I don't know if we should put too much credence in that, but just overall though, I worry a little bit about assuming that he's not going to win, even though there's quite a positive spread towards Hillary Clinton in the polls, because, and this is just a guess on my part, but it seems to me that there might be some people who are supporting Donald Trump that aren't willing to admit it to a pollster, but they're going to vote for him, but they're not going to admit that they voted for him. So if he does win, it'll be hard to find anybody who actually admits to causing it. But think about Brexit. We didn't think that Brexit was going to go through either. So it is a worry. I think Canadians should be worried about this.
Well, of course, too, some people might go to the polls with the attitude, Well, they say Hillary's going to win, so my one little vote for Trump isn't going to make any difference.
Yeah, it's a protest vote. Like, I talked to several people, and they said, we got to shake things up. We got to do something. That Hillary represents the status quo and the Washington insider. And I mean, one of the advantages Donald Trump has is he's not politically correct, which people kind of like, and he's never been involved at all in any elected position. So he can't be his record can't be examined, and he appears to be an outsider. Now, I think that's a bit far-fetched, given that he's been making millions of dollars off of connections to political insiders for many, many years, mostly in New York, but elsewhere too. But that aside, he definitely has the advantage of appearing to be a fresh start and shake things up. And there is a lot of, not just in the United States, but all over. There's a lot of people that seem to be unhappy, and they want to do something, and throwing out the old and bringing in the new, even if it's quite flawed, as it seems like Donald is, it seems appealing to them. It's kind of like pushing the reset button on your computer.
Well, so many people didn't give Justin Trudeau a chance to win as prime minister going into the Canadian election either.
Exactly. And, when he said that he's going to run a budget deficit, and his popularity actually went up rather than down in the middle of the election campaign, that was a sign, I think, that something different is happening. Like, this is a change. Like, people are thinking about everything with a different point of view, and they're looking at things with different eyes, and they're willing to consider radical solutions. But for Canada, Donald Trump's radical policies would probably be quite a big negative. So, I think people should probably be hoping that he doesn't win, even if they don't like the alternative. I think we probably in Canada should be hoping that Donald Trump does not make it into the White House.
Well, he might have the same attitude, though, as Al Gore did, the former vice president, when he made so many announcements when he would say the U.S., Canada, and foreign nations have agreed to do this. And so, I mean, I know when it comes to international trade, right now, Canadian and U.S. businesses are so intertwined when it comes to supply and equipment, material, even personnel, where they flow pretty well freely across the border, except for that 1 or 2 hour check there, that really, if you start trying to separate the two, you don't just destroy Canadian business, you destroy American businesses as well. Yeah,
no, and I couldn't find in my little research project I did, I couldn't really find very many, other than the Keystone thing and not building a wall, I couldn't find any instances where he specifically singled out Canada for some of his more crazy ideas. So I think that either he's maybe not aware. It's possible he's just not aware that we're a separate country, but he probably is aware. And if he is aware, he probably maybe gives us some kind of special status in his mind. And if he does get into the presidency, I suspect his advisors will point out that Canada's had this long-standing relationship. But if he turns on Mexico, as that was his first big leap forward in the polls, was when he claimed that he was going to send back all of the illegal immigrants to Mexico, and he was going to build a wall. And he took a jump in the polls. And so, I mean, if he ever turned those kind of attitudes onto Canada, then we would be. If he's going to do that to Mexico, and we're in the same North American Free Trade Agreement, then if he puts in policies to do something to Mexico, it may just spill over on us accidentally, and that's certainly happened before, where Canada gets caught, and then we have to go running to Washington as Canadians and say, "Oh, you know what? We're such good friends, we deserve an exemption." And that's a difficult position for us to be in.
Well, Canadians haven't been dubbed drug dealers and rapists yet by Trump. Another thing about Trump, though, they've done a poll in Canada. 78% of Canadians wouldn't like Trump as a president. 90% of British Columbians are against Trump. Would he take that to heart?
Yeah, I don't, he probably doesn't like, I think he's got a Trump Tower in Vancouver, though, so I don't know if he has to. But he said, I think one of the reasons is that, and this would be true across Canada, I think, except maybe in parts of Calgary, but he's going to tear up the Paris Agreement and the climate change accord that everybody agreed to, and he's basically going to throw it out, and that would make him very unpopular in Canada, as I say, except for maybe Calgary. So it's he's got a lot of policies now. Everybody keeps waiting for him to moderate those policies, but so far it's almost like instead of moderating them, he doubles down on some of the more outlandish ones.
Yeah, it's working for him so far. Why change?
Exactly. I'm going to write this up in my weekend note that comes out on Friday, so if people are interested, they can go to the macbethgroup.com and sign up for the free copy of the weekend note. It comes out every week.
Hilliard, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Great to be on the show again.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio and financial advisor in Edmonton. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. You can find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be emailed to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.